Hi guys, so I come to you today to answer your questions from my Q&A video where I asked you to ask me any questions you wanted answered. I got well over 100 questions, many of which were on university, many of which were on other things, all of which I've written down in my little suffragette notebook to keep these videos at a reasonable length and make sure I answer your university questions in full. I'm going to do a separate university PhD study Q&A video which will go up after this one, and this one's just going to be the generic questions that everybody asked me about all of the other possible topics you could have asked. So without further ado, let's jump straight in, shall we? So the first question I have written down is, do you have any dreams or plans on writing your own book, and in that case what about? I mean, yes, I've wanted to be an author since I was about 7 years old. At that time what I really wanted to write was fantasy stories. By the time I was a teenager I wanted to be the next Christopher Paolini, who was like the ideal in my head. Now that I'm a little bit older, my dreams have matured and grown and simultaneously become more defined, but also cover an even broader spectrum. I mean, I still love writing fiction, and to write a fiction book is still one of my dreams, but a priority in my life is also to write non-fiction books. I consider myself an academic, and hopefully one day I will have published academic books on ancient history. I'd also really like to write accessible, fun books about ancient history for the general public as well as for children specifically. So those are the kind of things I would like to write. Do you collect anything other than books? I wouldn't say I collect anything to the extreme of which I collect books. And I also collect books as a practical item that I'm going to read, so they're not just display items, although I do love pretty books. But other than that, I can't think of anything much I collect as an adult. When I was a child, I collected My Little Ponies and rubbers, as in like erasers shaped like animals. What's your ethnicity and do you speak Greek? And other than having some Polish relatives, I'm nothing more exciting than Scottish or British. And no, I don't speak modern Greek, but I do read ancient Greek. I wouldn't really say I speak it because people don't really chat in ancient Greek, but I read ancient Greek. Do you have any hobbies outside of YouTube and reading? I mean, I really enjoy spending time with my friends. I like to visit museums and art galleries and go to the cinema and stuff like that, and play video games now and then, so I guess those are hobbies. Do you have a favourite character from classical mythology? I think I would have found this question a lot easier before I did my ancient history degree and before I did my masters and started my PhD, because I'm at the point now where it's very difficult to consider any of them a favourite. I used to think of Dionysus and Artemis as my favourite gods, but do you know what? They're as big of arseholes as all the other ones. All the gods are absolute arseholes. And if a character is not being an arsehole, usually terrible things are happening to them, so it's very difficult to pick a favourite. She's not from mythology, but my favourite character from classical literature is Chloe from Daphnis and Chloe by Longus. What was the first classical book you read? Again, I'm not actually sure. I know early on some of the first ones I read were Medea by Euripides, Homer's Odyssey, Homer's Iliad, probably the really obvious popular ones. If you could remove one book from traditional education and replace it with another, what would it be? The one book I remember hating in high school was Death of a Salesman, so I guess I would just chuck it. And do you know what? I think it'd be quite interesting to kind of put in its place a modern young adult book that deals with depression or mental illness in a good way. I mean, there's lots of young adult books now that deal with this topic. It's become quite popular, and I get the impression that some of it don't deal with it as well as others. I haven't read that many, but I think it would be a really great book for teenagers to read. Perhaps make it more relatable to them and their experiences. What was your favourite show or movie as a child? I think my favourite movie was the My Little Pony movie, which, do not underestimate, it has Danny DeVito in it. It's amazing. And one of my favourite TV shows was definitely The Gummy Bears, which is real. I swear every time I talk about The Gummy Bears with anybody, they're like, what is that? Do you not mean the Care Bears? No, it was a Disney programme about bears that jumped really high in the medieval period. Also, in fact, the BBC mini-series adaptation of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, I loved that so much. What is your favourite must-read graphic novel? For non-fiction, probably Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, and for fiction, The Encyclopedia of Early Earth by Isabel Greenberg, although I do have a video of all of my favourite comic books either coming up or already having gone up, so also worth checking out. If you were to win $1 million, what would you do? Now I actually think I've got a list on my phone that I made like a year ago of things I would buy if I like won the lottery or something. Okay, I found it, right? Apparently I would bulk buy those straws that turn your milk into chocolate when you drink from them. Buy my parents a ton of airline vouchers so that they could travel to places because they love going on holiday. I'd also probably pay them back the money I owe them. I would collect Harry Potter ones because if I just had like frivolous money, that's what I would collect, even though I only have one at the moment. I'd also buy all the different editions of Harry Potter books. I'd maybe have to buy a house to put all this stuff in. I would never leave university. I would just constantly keep getting degrees because, well, why not? I would buy one of those Jo Malone candles because they're like £100 and I love scented candles, but there's no way I could justify that unless I won the lottery. And I would also buy my granny a toasty machine, which she has since acquired, so more money for me. What would the world look like if we all went vegetarian or vegan? Star Trek Next Generation. They're all vegetarian in that, so. Tell us about some of the stories you have written. Over the past few years, everything I've written has pretty much been a retelling of a Greek myth or inspired by a Greek myth. I think it helps me to work through them and kind of explore the different themes in them, also change them the way I would want them to be and highlight the issues I would like to highlight in them that weren't highlighted in antiquity, and also just because I know them so well and I really enjoy reading retellings. The one I've been working on most recently is a retelling of Medea's story from start to finish. Favourite historians? Obviously Mary Beard, she is an idol. I love Tim Whitmarsh, Sarah Pomeroy and Nicole LaRoe have written a lot of stuff I'm interested in. Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones's books are all really accessible but all really fascinating. Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes or Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman Sherlock Holmes. I love Martin Freeman, he's one of my all-time favourite actors, but I do not like Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock Holmes particularly. It's not that I don't like the TV show or like his acting in it, I just don't really appreciate it as an adaptation of the books. I kind of have to separate it in my head, whereas I think the Robert Downey Jr. ones are just so tongue-in-cheek and spoofy that I enjoy them more. Have you read any books by Italian authors? Off the top of my head, the only one I can think of is Italo Calvino. What is your favourite non-fiction? Most recently, probably either Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates or The Honour Code, How Moral Revolutions Happened by Kwame Anthony Appiah. Neither of which are ancient. Controversial. Do you think classics are underrepresented in BookTube? Why? If we're talking ancient literature, I don't see a lot of people talk about ancient literature, but I don't find that surprising. There's so many books out there. If we're talking generally just classics, which I'm assuming you probably were, like Jane Austen and Thomas Hardy and that kind of thing, no. I don't think they're underrepresented in BookTube at all. I think at this point, BookTube is huge, and pretty much everyone in my subscription feed either reads classics regularly, is trying to get into classics, or dips in and out of them occasionally. So I certainly don't find them to be underrepresented in BookTube, at least the BookTube that I watch. And I think BookTube is so diverse and people read from so many different genres these days that if the people you're subscribed to aren't reading classics, then there's just yet more BookTubers for you to discover. I have actually done 4 BookTuber recommendations videos which are full of people who either occasionally or often read classics, so I will link those in the description box. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What are your goals? And I know that somebody else asked me where I see myself in 10 years later on, so let's just do both of those at once. I am in the process of trying to train myself to stop planning as far ahead. I have, ever since I've been a child, been like a massive planner. I need to know what's going on, I need to know what's happening, and when things don't go exactly to my schedule, I get really anxious and it stresses me out. So I am trying to learn to be better than that, and I think I am learning to be better than that. Not that I don't still plan, but I think my plans need to be more relaxed. So in the broadest terms, 5 years from now I'll hopefully have just finished my PhD, because I'm a part-time PhD student, which means it should take me around 5 years. 10 years from now I will be 34 I would like to have a house by the time I'm 34, or at least a mortgage on a house, and I guess that's the kind of time in my life I would assume I would be starting to think about having a baby. My mum had me around 34, so that seems like a reasonable age. So yeah, I guess I'd see myself in 10 years kind of settled down and living in the UK, maybe teaching, maybe I'll have a documentary series by there. The world is my oyster. Do you prefer All the Bright Places or The Fault in Our Stars? I have not read All the Bright Places, so The Fault in Our Stars. What is your favourite Shakespeare? Now I've only read Macbeth, Midsummer Night's Dream, Winter's Tale and The Tempest, but my favourites are Midsummer Night's Dream and Macbeth. One's a comedy, one's a tragedy. They do different things for me. 2 people asked me what the best fantasy book I've ever read was. Somebody else asked me for recommendations of favourite books with dragons in them. All of my favourite fantasy books, apart from Harry Potter, have dragons in them. Harry Potter does have dragons in them, true, but I'm talking about like sentient dragons that have conversations with people. That's the kind of dragons I like. So I would say for both fantasy and dragons, my favourite books are The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, The Rainworld Chronicles by Robin Hobb, and Tooth and Claw by Jo Walton. Children's fantasy is a whole other kettle of fish because fantasy is almost entirely what I read as a child. So if you'd like to see a separate video on that, I can do some recommendations. You also all know I love Terry Pratchett and Tom Holt for a more comical fantasy story. What is your favourite pizza flavour? I'm a vegetarian, so I generally go for a margherita, or I really like the addition of either some goat's cheese or feta cheese to a margherita pizza and some black olives. 2 people asked me what my favourite book of this year is so far. I think it's still Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates, but a close runner-up would be New World Fairy Tales by Cassandra Parkin. What is a book that marks a before and after in your life? Probably The Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood, because that's the book that really cemented my fascination with Greek mythology and antiquity as an adult. I had definitely been interested in the Egyptians and the Romans and the Greeks as a child and liked children's history books and documentaries on those kind of topics, but Margaret Atwood's Penelopiad I read when I was a teenager, maybe like 14, and it really refocused those subjects into an adult world. It was probably the first piece of literary fiction I read, so it just had a big impact on my life. How has 2016 treated you so far? Well, generally speaking, alright. There's been ups and downs. I started my PhD, that was exciting. I didn't get a scholarship most recently, which was upsetting. I had to get my cervix cauterised, which was kind of stressful. Please, if you have a vagina, get your smear test. But a reasonable amount of ups, so that's nice. Especially since last year, the first sort of quarter or third of the year was really hard for me and I had a pretty miserable time for most of it. So, you know, 2016 has been off to a good start actually, a very good start. If you couldn't be a scholar, what would you be? When I was younger, I was definitely really interested in like film production. I think that would have been really interesting to go into kind of media and like the more technical side of film and like actually done a course in it. Like my skills are what they are. But if I'd done a course, it would have been really interesting to see where that could have gone, although I'm really happy with what I'm doing. This is what I want to do, but that's just another thing that I've always found really interesting. I did, up until I was about 18, 19, want to be an archaeologist, so actually if I wasn't doing this kind of side of scholarship, I probably would have ended up becoming an archaeologist. What is your favourite thing or place in Scotland? I think there's lots of lovely places in Scotland. I do love the Scottish Highlands though. I would highly recommend anyone visit the Scottish Highlands. They're so beautiful, there's so much to see. There's so much wildlife and nature up there that is just lovely. Skye and Mull are both places I would highly recommend you visit. I also love Iron Brew. What do you think for Emma Watson and her work with He for She? I think Emma Watson's awesome. I think what she's doing is really great. She's a very intelligent young woman, she's in the media's limelight, she is very highly regarded by many people, she has lots of fans, and I think she's using that position to do some really phenomenal work. And I really admire her. Why do you have a 10-book challenge on Goodreads? I, for the first time in a few years, set my Goodreads challenge to 10 books. This is mainly because I am quite happy with the number of books I read, but something I really wanted to focus on this year was reading a lot more big books and non-fiction books, both of which take me a longer time to read. And although I am like super ahead of my Goodreads goal, even if I had set it to 60, which is my regular annual goal, I really just didn't want a number that I was working towards because it didn't really correspond to what my aims were this year. If there'd been an option to set a page goal, I probably would have done that. Do you like cooking, and what's your favourite recipe? I don't really like cooking. I'm not very good at it. My one thing that I can make decently is butternut squash risotto. When I feel like I'm trying to be impressive and make a meal, I'll do that. I do, however, love baking. I absolutely love baking, and my favourite recipe, other than a good old-fashioned Victoria sponge, is a lemon tart. Who or what inspired you to read? Definitely my parents, especially my dad as an example, but my parents were so encouraging of reading as a child. They never pressured me to read anything I didn't want to read, they never made me finish a book I didn't want to read, but they demonstrated to me how wonderful reading is and made me want to try things and read more things, and they always took me to the library. They used to give me, I think, £15 a month to buy books for myself from Waterstones, which was like 3 books a month as a child, and anything else I wanted I could get from the library, and they just made reading a very pleasurable thing for me. It was never a pressure, it was always something that I found a lot of fun in. Aeschylus, Euripides or Sophocles, and why? Euripides, because I like his twists on the traditional myths. Then I got a few questions like, are you coming to Athens? Have you visited any of the places you've studied? And have you been to Italy or Greece? I've actually been to Athens once before. I went a couple of years ago. I don't have any plans to come again in the near future because can't plan that far ahead. I'm going to Rome though in a week, which is super exciting, but I've also been to Rome twice before as an adult, so I just think it's going to be quite like a chill time and revisit some sites I've seen before, and maybe go to Ostia where I haven't actually ever been before. But I've also been to Crete to see Knossos, which was amazing, and I've also been to Naples and Pompeii as an adult, so I've seen sites there. I'm starting to think this video is going to be far too long, so I think I'm going to end it here. Well, I'm going to keep filming, but I'm going to end this video here and split it into 2 parts, which means this Q&A will have turned into 3 videos. Hopefully you don't mind that, but as you can tell, I'm not the snappiest of question answers, and I also have a lot of questions to get through. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for part 2.